Well, good evening and welcome to Yada Yahowah. I'm here with Kirk. It continues to be a world in rapid decline. The United States approved some $40 billion
Yep.
for the war in the Ukraine. U.S. politicians, senators, and congressmen are openly stating that their intent is to eliminate Putin. Their intent is to destroy the military of our enemy, and their quotes, as if we have declared war on Russia. We have pledged significant amounts of that 40-plus billion, I think it's now $50 billion in total, to protect the Ukrainian borders. Heck, this is an administration that won't protect the American borders.
I was just about to say, yeah.
We'll spend billions on anti-aircraft, anti-tank, anti-personnel weapons to go kill Russians, but we can't get baby formula on our shelves. We have an economy that's in free fall. Inflation is the worst it has been in many, many, many decades. Our supply lines are thrashed. And yet, with the dollar in free fall, with our economy in shambles, with our deficit growing at record rates, we've declared an unofficial war on Russia, the nation with the most nuclear weapons in the world. Well, boy, I tell you one thing, Kirk. There is no question how this world is going to digress from what it was pre-COVID to what it will be in the summer of 2029 when all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
There's no way to stop it. You know, Yahowah said that the catalyst for the turning point for Israel proper, when millions of jihadists flood into Israel, when Israel is divided and narrowed at her waist and becomes indefensible, such that the so-called West Bank are given to the Muslims, the fake Palestinians. That it's the fall of Damascus that causes that. Do you know the only reason that the Damascus government still stands?
Putin.
Russia, right?
Remember he told Obama, he said,
Russia's military
I'll cross that line.
is saying the consequence of other than Assad is worse than Assad, which is the distinction we couldn't make as Americans in Iraq or in Libya, where we weren't smart enough to recognize that other than Saddam Hussein and other than Muammar Gaddafi was actually worse than those two dictators. And so Putin has actually made the right call, as bad as Assad is, but with the world pouring hundreds now of billions of dollars of advanced weaponry into the Ukraine, declaring war on Russia, providing intelligence for Russia, and all the weapons for Russia, for the Ukraine to use against Russia, Russia's not going to be able to support Damascus. And when they pull out of Damascus,
of course.
Yeah, what happens? Yeah. It falls. And what does Yahowah say happens when it falls? That is the time of the Towrah harvest, and the removal of God's people from the planet, and the time of Jacob's troubles. As a consequence of all of this, of us aiding and abetting world war, with the United States as the provocateurs of that war, there's a food crisis of major magnitude around the world.
Oh, yeah.
Prices are soaring. But it's not just that prices of food are up 30, 40, 50%.
Can't get it.
Fertilizer is up by more than that, and without fertilizer, we're going to have greater shortages. And without fuel, there's no ability to transport that food, even if it was grown. And so we're in a position where it's going to get much worse before it, if it ever gets better. And all of that is because we were so stupid, we put embargoes and sanctions on Russia and aided and abetted the invasion of Russia, put the world into a position of ultimate crisis. It's one of the most stunning reversals of fortune, probably in world history. Wheat has increased in price by 43%. Cooking oils have increased by 40%. Price of chicken has increased by 42%. Countries around the world are going to starve.
You're going to starve, absolutely.
And when people starve, there are revolutions.
Mm-hmm.
The 69% increase in the price of fertilizers. On another matter, by the way, before I try to leave that matter, there is a journalist today that I've only listened to probably 15 to 20 times. And I only listen to him in passing while I'm eating dinner. Tucker Carlson's his name. Fox News is the network. I don't much like Fox News, but this fellow's exceptional. Well, I beat him to the problem in Ukraine. I recognized what we were going to do was abysmally stupid 5 months before he did, and was beating this drum about the Ukraine every week for 5 months before he picked it up. I must say that his analysis of what's happening in Ukraine is brilliant. I would strongly encourage folks to listen to him, and he's unique. He recognizes the problem is on both sides of the aisle with Democrats and Republicans, and none of them deserve to hold office in this country for what they have done. It's shameful. But his analysis of the reasons behind Ukraine are really quite insightful. I remember, Kirk, going back 7-8 years ago, I was doing Shattering Myths, where I was doing 3 hours of news commentary 5 days a week, and I would scour the news, and I thought my insights on what was happening around the world and what was being reported about what was happening were pretty astute. And I got to tell you, this fellow, he's better than I was. He's really good at heralding the seriousness of the problems that undergird America, and he doesn't mince words. He tells it like it is. There is another problem in America. Finally, even the left is recognizing that Black Lives Matter was a horrendous mistake. The basis of Black Lives Matter was a complete and utter lie. That blacks, by a factor of 8 to 1, are more likely to kill blacks than are whites. So the whole finger-pointing thing was unbelievably stupid. But what they have found now in 2 years of research since Black Lives Matter raised its ugly head, that conditions in the black community are far worse than they were before the organization rose to influence. Homicides on blacks have skyrocketed. They've gone from about 7,400 a year in America to 10,000.
My gosh.
Stunning increase. And crime in the black community is up a similar percentage. And the reason is because as a cop, you'd have to be out of your ever-loving mind
You just won't go there.
to police the black community. Why would you do that? If you make a mistake, you're going to end up in jail. And last time I checked, we humans are prone to mistakes. And you're dealing in many cases with people who are drugged out of their mind, who have no conscience, who would just as soon kill you as anything else, and have no means of working things out using words. And you're going to go in there and risk your life knowing that everybody in the world is going to be against you if you actually harm one of the belligerents? Even if they're drugged, as was George Foreman, even if they were passing counterfeit bills, even if they were resisting arrest, if you get too aggressive, which the Chapin clearly was, you're going to spend, 40 years in jail?
Mm-hmm.
Be accused of murder when you can rest assured he had zero intent to kill him. And there, of course, was no premeditation, but it doesn't matter. So by their focus on defunding the police, their focus on blaming whites for the problems that blacks are perpetrating on themselves, they have made the conditions vastly worse in the black communities across America. And you got no one to blame but themselves. It is the problem with progressives. Evidence and reason do not matter. Gun-related homicides in the black community rose year after year after Black Lives Matter by 35% a year. Overall homicides up by 40%. It is it's exactly as we said it would be. Another interesting fact is that recent disclosures have found that Black Lives Matter paid $6 million for a home in the Los Angeles area, Studio City, a property, a home with 6 bedrooms and swimming pool and sound stage and the like, and that the founders of Black Lives Matter have used it personally. And that the founders of Black Lives Matter, being a good Marxist, used the money to buy several homes for herself and her supporters. And she says, I've made regrettable mistakes that do not ensure trust, and even admitted to using personal property. The criticisms of me are wrong. Oh, yeah. Well, because I want them to be. One of the sad things happening in Israel right now is that the Pakistani Authority has decided that they're not going to allow, even under joint custody, Israel to inspect the bullet that shot and killed Shireen Abu Akleh, who was, she's called a journalist. She's not a journalist. She's a propagandist. And you know she's a propagandist because, she was given a state funeral draped in the Pakistani flag and with Pakistani armed parade marchers and the like. She was given a state funeral. So she's worked for Al Jazeera, which is also a Muslim state-owned organization. And so the Israelis have said, listen, if obviously she was killed, obviously there was a battle in this area because of the increased murders by Islamic terrorists of Jewish civilians, and so we're not going to continue just to sit by and wait for the next killing and then go after the killers. We want to root out those who are planning the next murder and thereby save the lives of innocent people. And so they were there in that community, and this propagandist decided that she would film those terrible Jews defending their right to live. And she was shot, killed. The Pakistanians who were shooting screamed out that we got one. I got an Israeli military officer, and I see him. He fell dead. There weren't any Israeli officers or military killed. The only person that was killed and fell was the so-called journalist. And the Jews are pretty well disciplined on their riflery and their tactics. They do not shoot indiscriminately, but the Muslims do. And so it's highly likely the Muslims killed her, and therefore the Pakistani Authority will not allow Israel to examine the bullet because, well, both sides used .223 ammunition. The United States supplied the rifles and the munitions to the Palestinian Authority. And of course, the Jewish military, the IDF, used the same caliber. So all you could do is say, all right, we'll compare that bullet to all of the rifles of those of our troops who were there. And if it was one of our people that errantly shot them, we'll take full accountability and apologize for it. And if it's one of yours, then stop screaming that we committed murder, because that's clearly not true. But the world is just eating this up. Love to blame Israel. On another note, the United States decided that it would continue to hoodwink and manipulate the world into opposing Russia. You know that Bulgaria, which is on the border there of Russia, is going to receive natural gas supplies, who had previously received them from Russia's Gazprom, from the United States. So our fuel prices will continue to rise.
Yes, supply shrinks.
Yeah. The top U.S. Senate Republican released the finding of an investigation earlier this week that demonstrates that Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti knew that his top advisor was sexually harassing city employees and was routinely making racist remarks. So now what? Also on the side of the world is falling apart, the pro-abortion protesters have not just marched to show their animosity towards the Supreme Court for the draft that indicates they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, probably on a 5-4 vote, just as Roe v. Wade was passed on a 5-4 vote. They are now marching to the homes of justices like John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh. So they're threatening Supreme Court justices, going to their homes.
My God.
Yep. For safe abortions. So, safe abortion. How safe is an abortion for the unborn child?
Yeah, zero.
Yeah. You know, my view on abortion has always been the same. I've said it so many times on Shattering Myths that in the first trimester, it's hard to argue with the woman, with the man who impregnated her. Collectively, they should have say on what they wish to do. And in the third trimester, it's clearly murder, and the woman, her husband, if she or boyfriend, if he's encouraging it, and the doctor should all be indicted for murder, because it's murder. That child is viable on its own. And in the second trimester, it's you're at a time where if the fetus is viable, the child would live outside of its mother, then it's murder. And you need to be really careful about these sorts of things. We need to have a conversation that limits abortion to a very finite cross-section of people. But to have a conversation about it is difficult in today's world. I mean, Yahowah is both pro-choice and pro-life. So it's hard to bring God into this discussion. But reason should prevail, and of course, in politics, it seldom does. Speaking of a lack of reason, the European Parliament, which is becoming unbelievably liberal, just put out an edict which demands that Israel not build homes in what they call the West Bank. The 14 European nations said in a joint statement issued today, "We are deeply concerned by the decisions of the Israeli Higher Planning Council to advance plans for the construction of more than 4,000 housing units in the West Bank." Yeah, that's, I can see.
What
I can
business
see that
is
because,
it?
let's say, well, it makes perfect sense, Kirk. We don't want to condemn when Muslims come in and use knives and axes to kill Jews. We don't want to condemn the Taliban for taking that country back to the Stone Age. But we will condemn Israel for building houses. Can you think of any other country in the world that is condemned for building homes?
No.
I mean, how big of a racist do you have to be to condemn people not only of building homes, but doing so in their ancestral homeland?
Still the Navajo, they can't have another home.
Oh, goodness. Come on. I had sent you earlier this week the chapter I had finished writing early this week. It was called Ka'ani, like me, to be or not to be. It is the 7th chapter in the 7th volume of Yada Yahowah. It's just the 8th chapter in the 7th volume of Yada Yahowah. Yes. Mm-hmm. And you read it and said, "Boy, this is really interesting. Can we do a show starting on this chapter?" So I said, "Oh, okay, what the heck?" Because I found it interesting too. You never know when you're doing these things because, quite honestly, I find every chapter interesting. I mean, if you do this kind of stuff 8 to 10 hours a day,
my new favorite. Yeah.
Right. You'd be crazy if you didn't find it interesting. And the more you learn, the more you're able to learn. And the more you understand, the more you're able to understand. So it is reinforcing in that way. Mm-hmm. So, in
all fairness, too, though, it does segue into Yirmiyah's story. There's parts of it where you go. In fact, I was in Yirmiyah studying for the night show, assuming the other. We'd approach it we'd go back to Yirmiyah. I said, "Well, I had no, that goes right there. This section, this page is this page." Because Yah always repeats, of course, but it was just like, this is too good to leave sitting. I thought.
Yeah. So
I like it.
My view is that one of the most interesting prophecies found anywhere in the Torah is presented by Moshe, who is the leading expert on the subject of prophecy. Now,
I guess.
So when Moshe comes out with a prophecy, I'm going to view him as the foremost expert on the subject. Now, considering the instructions on who to distrust, which are associated with the revelation. So he is, in this particular revelation, his focus is who we should not trust. It is quite amazing that both Christianity and Islam lay claim to this prophecy. Both religions claim it speaks of their guy, when it actually applies to neither. And the Jews for whom it was written have long failed to recognize the individual who is actually being depicted. And yet, what the prophet Moshe was describing not only resides at the center of Yahweh's story. This fellow is the most interesting man in the world. His life will be even greater in the future than it was in the past. The second of 4 Zeroah is most like Moshe of all the people who have ever lived. And his life calibrates our assessment of time with an equal number of years spanning his life on either side of Eden. 3,000 years separating our expulsion from Eden and our re-entry.
Return. Mm-hmm.
We're going to cover this prophecy because, frankly, Kirk wants us to. By the way, Kirk, I received a phone call 2 days ago from my really good friend Yoel and his wife Mary. She may be listening. She's caught up on all the archives. I've just sent her 6 of the new volumes of Yada Yah. And when she called to say, I've listened to all of the archives in the last year and finally caught up. And boy, I said, I am so impressed, she said, with that fellow Kirk. And I just love the way that he uses the letters to explain the meaning and how it reinforces what we've all know and come to learn. So you'll be happy to know, Kirk, that...
hey, I'm a Yoel fan, though. I was really...
So mutual. Yoel's one of my favorite people. He's such a keen intellect and great character. And he's fun to have on this program. So we're going to cover this prophecy from the beginning to the end because the teaching associated with it is exceedingly helpful, and it's seldom considered because it begins talking about the Lowy. And the Lowy is not something, the lives of the Lowy is not something that are interesting to most people. Rabbinical Judaism can't stand it because they want to pretend like the Lowy don't exist, that God never spoke of them, because rabbis have replaced the Lowy just as Hashem and G-D have replaced Yahweh. So they want nothing to do with this part of Dabarim. Of course, Christians have replaced Yahweh's priest with their own. And Muslims, I'm not sure, know what a priest is. What we're going to read, and by the way, if I'm being pejorative towards Muslims and Fakistinians, really, my comments are far
well
too
placed.
Oh no, they are far too kind.
Well, they could be
Islam is far worse than I am stating in this program, and I don't say that as a matter of opinion, but as a matter of fact. And should you not agree, then you read Prophet of Doom, and you get back to me.
Yeah.
So we're going to cover this prophecy from beginning to end because, as I say, the teaching associated with it is very helpful and very, very seldom considered. What we're going to read leaves no quarter for the religious. It impugns everyone who has claimed to have received a vision from God since Malachi, some 2,450 years ago. Now, speaking to the Lowy, those enlisted by Yahweh to serve Israelites, Moshe began the 18th chapter of Dabarim by saying, there should never be for the Lowy among the priests, inclusive of the lineage of Lowy, parcels of land, possessions, or donations, or an inheritance associated with Yisrael. I'll go on in a moment, but so this is pretty tough on Clarify. Pretty tough. This is devastating for any cleric who receives a stipend, a salary, or donations. And that would, of course, be really tough on the rabbis who are overpaid by 300% compared to the rest of religious leaders. They're the ultimate money grubbers. So God is just saying, nope, if you are going to serve me in this role as a priest, those officiating as ministers, mediators, teachers, advisors, judges, and counselors, if you're going to serve me in those roles and you are an offspring of the Lowy, you are not to own land, possessions, or receive donations. You don't even get an inheritance, which is assigned to successive generations associated with the land of Israel. They will be nourished instead by their inheritance, which is the transforming fire and material light of Yahowah. So the compensation for the Lowy Cohen is to be sustained by an inheritance that includes the transforming fire and maternal light, the Ishe, the elevating energy, that which converts physical organic material into energy and light, commonly rendered offering by fire. Isha in Hebrew is woman or female individual, wife or mother, and Isha is the feminine word for Ish, fire. So what the Lowy are going to receive, if they do their job as God asks, is that their inheritance will be to be transformed from a physical being that is decaying into a spiritual energy being that will live forever. Now, I would tell you, I'd prefer that to money. And by the way, that's the same offer that Yahowah is providing for anyone who chooses to work with him in this way. Don't elicit money for serving God's people by communicating his will and word. Your reward is elsewhere. Therefore, an inheritance will not exist for them among their brethren. Their inheritance comes from God. Therefore, they're not going to receive an inheritance from their brethren. Yahowah is their inheritance, their birthright, and their legacy, in accordance with what he has said regarding the relationship for them. Simple.
Mm-hmm.
Profound. If you want to engage, and today nobody even knows if they are a Lowy because the children of Israel became so misled, misguided, lost in their religion. They all but invited the Romans to come in and conquer them. And when the temple was destroyed, the genealogical records were destroyed. And by that time, after the Maccabees anyway, the rabbis had replaced the Cohen and the Lowy. And it's kind of the first revolution in Israel. And the Maccabee revolution really speaks to that. It was the revolution for power. In fact, the first invasion of Rome into Israel taking place about 66 BCE was all over this, where two brothers were vying. Both wanted to be a chief priest. And so Mommy, who Alexandria, I think was her name, good Greek name, and she had two sons, and she wanted one son to be king and the other one to be chief priest. But the money and the power was with the chief priest.
With the priest.
Yeah, not with king. And so they were bickering over who would be chief priest, not who would be king. And this whole idea of people who aren't Lowy, who are doing this for the money, that particular revolution took place shortly after and during the Maccabee revolt, which was really what it was all about. And so what Yahowah was saying, the way that he is setting this up is that each of the tribes of Israel were given land and were given an inheritance of that land, and they were all given the opportunity to inherit the covenant. But the Lowy was going to be special. This was going to be a group that were going to be the closest to Yahowah, that were going to officiate at the Mikra, to enable the people to benefit from the invitations to meet with God. And they would help teach the Torah. They would help decide disputes between the people. They would be the de facto leaders of Israel, whose constitution would be the Torah. And it was a marvelous way of keeping the society functioning effectively. But to do it, Yahowah realized there's so much power, and with power there is wealth, associated with these roles, that the only way this was going to work is for those who served him to recognize that life is short and that their inheritance would be in eternity. And that's the way he set it up. Kirk, you receive the same remuneration I do for your participation in this program.
Yes.
I do this 6 and 7 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day, and I've done it now for 21 years. And I pay for the privilege. I'm not paid.
You do.
And so that is the way it needs to be. It just has to be that way if we're going to be effective stewards of Yahowah's testimony.
Agreed, yes.
And so he is clearly stating the way he wants it to be. And keep in mind, doing this, the Lowy were not malnourished. They were well fed. They were very comfortable. They could go and stay in anyone's home. They had the greatest job in the world. They worked for the greatest, most wonderful boss in the world. Their lives had value and purpose. And when they did their job well, they got to live forever in Yahowah's home, inheriting the universe.
Wow.
That's a good deal, folks.
That's a good deal. I'm not hungry. I get to go. I get to travel.
This idea, okay. So, I know I've shared this a gazillion times. So I do this 6 and 7 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day. It's not a sacrifice. That's a statement of commitment. It's not a statement of sacrifice. I'm doing it because I enjoy it, because I get a lot out of it, because I know that my life matters when I do it. I know it's pleasing to God.
That's the key.
Yeah, every cleric the world over, especially the money-grubbing rabbis, are complete hypocrites when they accept any remuneration for their services. If a person wants to serve God, there are a number of baseline requirements, all of which were prescribed in this opening statement, and none of which any cleric is currently observing. Work on behalf of God's people must be offered freely without profiting economically. We may not accept donations, a salary, or monetary gifts. The servant's contributions must be ka'asher dabar Yahowah, in Yahowah's name and consistent with God's testimony, especially regarding the proper way to receive the benefits of the relationship. In addition, we should recognize and advance the specific responsibilities assigned to the Lowy Cohen pertaining to Yahowah's home and his mikveh. Our principal resource must be the Torah, in which this instruction is placed. And our intended audience should be Yisrael, to whom Moshe spoke and led. Now, considering how frustrated Yahowah has been with Yisrael these past, 3,000 years, for having forgotten him and having broken the covenant, the last thing anyone should want to receive is the inheritance of the disinherited. Moreover, prior to Yahowah's return and the restoration of Israel, most of Israel is going, I think anyway, is way too polluted with the religious to be inviting. Now, take Jerusalem, for example. The most recent survey of its inhabitants reveals that they are equally divided between the stench of the Haredim, the anti-Semitic Muslims seeking to kill and expel Jews, and government employees who are overtly political. And it's littered with religious and government buildings. If you gave me a private aircraft to soar between here in the U.S. Virgin Islands and in Israel tomorrow, and said, we'll put you up in the presidential suite of the King David Hotel overlooking the Temple Mount. All expenses are paid. First meeting will be with the Prime Minister, and you can have keys to the city. I wouldn't go. I've been there. I think my reaction to Jerusalem was the same as Yahweh's. Place things to high heaven. It is way too religious, way too political, way too polluted with monuments to man. And that's not going to change until Yahweh's return. I want to go back when it's looking as God has envisioned. The proper inheritance is to be nourished by the transformative light of our spiritual mother, to experience the promised conversion from physical, organic beings into energy and light. When Yahweh's offering, it's incredibly elevating, and it's empowering, enlightening, and enduring. The superior inheritance is to be part of the covenant, to be a member of Yahweh's family, and to live with our God. This occurs when we listen to what he says about his relationship. Now, the Lowy Levites, by serving God's people, by leading them home while working as intermediaries during the Mikra invitations, inherited Yahweh's blessings. And now, keep in mind that explaining the Mikra is a big deal. They're complicated. What God is offering, how he's going about honoring his promises is very complex. I've written 3 volumes just on those 7 days. There's a lot to them. The Lowy had a big job. It wasn't just to explain this is what you need to do with the lamb and with yeast and with matzah, and
this is what it means.
The timing of it and what it represents. All of those symbols are important. All of what God did to and would do to honor his promises. All of it is essential. And all of it was discussed in great detail in the Torah and the prophets. So the Lowy Levites, by serving God's people, by leading them, they received the ultimate retirement package. No need to feel sorry for them or anyone else who serves God or his people. The perks and the privileges are literally out of this world. Now, should you be of the opinion that this pronouncement pertains exclusively to the, I'll put it in quotes, Levites, and thus does not apply to your Gentile church, your Arab mosque, or your political state house, well, you'd be correct. It doesn't apply to any of those things. There are no instructions for Gentile churches, mosques, or governments because they are expressly excluded from Yahweh's company and plans. So since these are the only instructions Yahweh prescribed for humankind, we either accept them or we reject him. Now, this note. It is important that we recognize who the Lowy are. Why they were excluded from one inheritance and offered another. They bear Lowy's name, which was given by his mother, Leah, as the third of 6 sons born to Jacob. She wanted her husband, Jacob, to be more devoted and attracted to her versus her sister, which is why she named him Lowy, to be united to join together. Now, Lowy was also the great-grandfather of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. The Lowy were set apart from the other descendants of Jacob. Their role was to serve as teachers, advisors, judges, and guides. Their primary purpose was to act as intermediaries, uniting Yahweh and Yehudim during the Mikra. They really had the most important job on earth, which is helping Yah's people understand the benefits they can enjoy by observing the Torah and by participating in the Be'ereth covenant, while, of course, answering the Moed invitations. I've tried to use past tense to describe the Lowy Cohen because, as I mentioned earlier, they have been replaced. Not by God. God does not replace, but by the religious, especially rabbis. Rather than a priest serving to affirm the Torah and aid in the celebrations of the Mikra, Jews have appointed rabbis to replace God's words, name, meetings with their own. Think about it for a moment, too. Lowy means to unite. Rabbi means to be great. What do you think Yahweh prefers? Someone who thinks they're great,
family,
or somebody who
joining,
wants to join him?
Yeah, he'll make you great if he wants you to be great. Just do your job. Join. Bring the family together.
This is Yahweh's plan, one completely rejected by Judaism. And this shall be the plan for the priests. Now, when Moshe is the one speaking, and he says, this shall be the plan for the priest. And he, by the way, as I said, he was an expert on prophecy. He is also the foremost expert on what it means to be a Lowy Cohen. He is the first and foremost of the Lowy Cohen. So this shall be the plan for the priests from the people. Out of the sacrificial animal prepared for the offering and consumption, whether a cow or a sheep, they shall give to the priest the shoulder of the sacrificial lamb, the jaw and the belly, the first and best of your grain, of your new wine, and of your oil, as well as your choicest fleece from your flock of sheep. You should give to them. 18:4. For indeed, Yahweh has chosen among them, out of all of the branches of the extended family of your people, to be present, to be stationed, and to be standing. Amad, to serve and to render assistance in the name of Yahweh, he and his sons, every day throughout time. So tell me, Jews, why do you have rabbis? How can you carry around a Torah, claim to be Torah observant, and listen to a rabbi? God said, this is my plan for every day throughout time. He also said that they would render assistance in the name of Yahweh. And your God-forsaken rabbis won't even say his name. You ought to be embarrassed. What's wrong with you? Now, we went into this saying that this was going to be the most extraordinary of prophecies. And here we are talking about the functions of the Lowy priests. And yet, if we don't understand God's plan, what good is it to unveil the identity of a person spoken of in prophecy? This is really the essence of it. The teaching that matters. So it's no wonder, Kirk, that the rabbis are opposed to such things. The priests didn't get paid. They served in Yahweh's name. And oh, by the way, they had to work weekends. Of course it didn't. It doesn't work for the rabbis. But alas, had the Loi continued to do as Yahweh requested, they would be well fed, handsomely attired, and suitably hydrated. Their job would have been exceedingly rewarding as well. To be Bashar, chosen by Yahweh to work with him, is the ultimate honor and privilege.
Yeah, I guess.
And let's make it clear. Yahweh chooses. This idea of religion, that you choose to worship your God, honor your God, be converted to religion, that is a person, that's not the way it works. Yahweh does the choosing. Now, we have the opportunity to accept or reject his choice, but other than Yisrael, Yahweh very seldom chooses someone that isn't going to choose him back. So it is the nature of God to make these choices. It's clear that God has no interest in saving everyone. He has no interest of working with everyone. And for those that says, I have chosen the ministry, I have chosen to serve God, bull. It's not the way it works.
Very appropriate, bull.
God chooses who works with him.
Bail. Yeah.
That's just all there is to it. If God hasn't chosen you to work with him, you ought not be doing it. If you don't work in Yahweh's name, you ought not be doing it. If you're in it for the money, you ought not be doing it. You'll notice that while the priests weren't given any money, everything that Yahweh asked for on behalf of the Loi was symbolic. Mm-hmm. If we were to apply this to a contemporary situation, it would be appropriate to feed and clothe those who are promoting the Torah, while also paying for their utilities. Olive oil would be the utility of the day. Yahweh's ministers were not given a salary or a housing allowance. Their only reward was the covenant and its benefits. So we have found the first of many reasons rabbis, pastors, and priests seldom preach, from Devarim 18. Now, Yahweh's list of just rights is especially revealing. The lamb is symbolic of Passover and eternal life. The Zeroah represents Moshe, Dod, Yosha, and likely Yada. The jaw and the belly speak of nourishing words. Reshith is the first word of the Torah. Wine is symbolic of the blood sprinkled on the doorway and on the mercy seat during Passover and on reconciliations. And olive oil represents the set-apart spirit as she enlightens and nurtures us. The fleece speaks of being part of Yahweh's flock and of being enveloped and adorned by the Ruach. This was more than a list of ingredients. It was another teaching moment. There are many strokes left in Yahweh's brush, so while every other tribe was assigned a particular territory within Yisrael, we learned that the Loi had free reign. And if a Loi shall come from one of your communities, anywhere within Yisrael, where to show the proper path to walk to get the greatest joy of life, he resides as a guest in that place. He may come to and enter wherever his soul desires, towards the dwelling place and home which, for the benefit of the relationship, Yahweh will choose. And he will render assistance, be attentive, and serve in the name of Yahweh his God, just like all of his fellow Loi, who will be present and standing there before Yahweh. So the Loi didn't inherit a particular plot of ground as did the 12 tribes. No, they got free reign. Just as we as spiritual beings have free reign of the entire universe, God is setting that up right here. The Loi, whose inheritance is to become as light, can enjoy any home within the community. But when they're there, their job is not to be a parasite. Their job isn't to tell the homeowner, move out of your bed, I'm moving in. No. God chooses where he wants them to go, and when they come and enter that home, then they are to work for the benefit of the relationship that Yahweh is seeking to establish with his people. The Loi is to render assistance. The Loi is to be attentive. The Loi is to serve in the name of Yahweh. The Loi is to be present and standing before Yahweh. Very simple formula. Stand before God, do not bow down. Render assistance, do not be served. Understand that this is God's home, and we serve at his pleasure. Now, there is more to this than just freedom of movement within Israel. Through the Mikra and by walking along the proper path to receive the benefits of the covenant relationship, we are transformed from physical, organic beings who are limited in space and time. Our souls will become more akin to energy and light, where we're going to be able to travel whenever and wherever we desire. Part of this message. Mankind, as in the case with all animals, has a nephesh soul. God is Ruach spirit. If we want to live with him, we need what he has. And fortunately, he's willing to give us access to the Ruach Kodesh, the set-apart spirit. She comes bearing gifts, and they are all free. But that's not to say that Yahweh does not expect something in return. He does. He wants to develop a family relationship along the lines of his Bereth covenant. Makom is a marvelous word. It was translated dwelling place and home. It is the home associated with Yahweh's choosing, which is obviously on Mount Moriah. The sham place upon which the Bereth covenant was affirmed with Abraham and Yishak. The place upon which Yahweh's home was built and upon which he provided the Passover lamb for the sacrifice. The Makom, standing place, is where God and man are united, where souls come to endure forever in Yahweh's presence. Kol means to stand up, to take a stand, to establish, to be accountable. Ma is an interrogatory, and it asks us to question who took a stand. Where did they take a stand? Why did they take a stand? How did they take this stand? And of course, what we find is that this Makom speaks to the fulfillment of the Mikra by Yahweh himself. Yahweh reminds us that the only appropriate compensation for services rendered in association with him comes from him. It doesn't come from men. And Yahweh does not have a credit card, does not have a checking account. We can feed, we can clothe, we can brighten the lives of his ministers, even welcome them into our home so that we can listen to them. But we are never to pay them. There is no donate button on the Yada Yahowah website. And there never will be one. Yes, the books that are available at Amazon are not free, but they are royalty free. All you're paying for when you buy them is the cost of printing the book. And the entire book, should you wish to pay for nothing, is available free. It's also available in the Kindle format for pennies. This, by the way, is a litmus test. Should anyone claim that they are serving the people on behalf of God and receive donations or monetary compensation for their ministry, as in the case with 99.9% of clerics worldwide, they are not to be trusted. Boy, that puts the Roman Catholic Church and its billions and billions and billions of dollars and some of the most expensive real estate in the world in quite a pickle, doesn't it? So let's be honest among ourselves. It's not just the money. It's the lies. It's the betrayal of the people. Yahweh holds every religious cleric in contempt. He will hold them accountable by sentencing today's rabbis and priests to a very long stay in Sheol. This is Devarim, Deuteronomy, which is words. Well, Devarim is words. Deuteronomy is Greek rubbish. 18:8. Yes. What the Greeks and the theologians will tell you is Deuteronomy means second law. Of course, there is no first
it's
law.
The first one.
I don't know how in the hell they got second.
Whatever.
It's a real
you
shame
don't have to
that
make sense. It doesn't matter, does it?
We would take Devarim, which means words, and change it to a misappropriated Greek
Can't say
title.
words, huh?
That is what has been done. They shall have an equal share in portion for them to consume, besides the selling price of the merchandise of their fathers. Now, this seems to suggest that even though the Lowy Cohen share of food, wine, or olive oil was designed to be consistently fair, if there was a bumper crop and it yielded more than they could consume, the fathers were able to sell the surplus. The statement also suggests that Yahweh is supportive of the idea of providing an inheritance for our children, passing along what we have earned to make their lives a little better. It's yet another way for us to model his intent through the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we examine the next several statements, we are confronted with the realization that the Toabah, abominable things conducted by the Goyim that are being disparaged and which God wants his people to avoid, focus on religious beliefs. These are disingenuous people, and it also includes intrusive governments. Therefore, the things men and women love, the things that bring people together and shape their lives, are the very things that Yahweh abhors. The second insight is a bit more subtle, albeit heartbreaking. Since Yisrael failed Yahweh by incorporating these things into their culture and became very much like the Gentiles, God had to find a Goy who had rejected the ways of religion and politics to reconnect with his people. And while that's a joyous opportunity for me and for us, it's very, very sad for Yahweh. He ought to have been able to work with his people as intended, but there were none. Third, while there are many aspects of the Egyptian, the Babylonian, Assyrian, Greek, and Roman religions that have been melded into Judaism, Christianity is an overt amalgamation of these religions. Even Bible is based upon Babylon, being confused by the Lord. Some of the many abominations of the Gentiles which were included into Christianity include their Trinity, crosses, worshiping the Lord, Christmas, Easter, Sunday observances, the Mother of God, the Queen of Heaven, the Son of God, along with the myth of a dying and resurrected deity becoming more popular than the father of the gods. The integration of church and state is an idea originally incubated within these Gentile civilizations, as is the ongoing war and killing in the name of God. The papal system of cardinals, bishops, priests, and nuns originated in Gentile cultures, as did the feudal system imposed by the Roman Catholic Church. At its core, Christianity is an amalgamation of Gentile ways. Indeed, when you come upon the land, which for the benefit of the relationship, Yahweh your God is giving, you should not accept, learn, teach, or imitate. Lo lamad. You should not instruct, be trained in, or become accustomed to, such that you act upon or engage in any semblance of the disgusting religious rites and political practices, Toabah, of the Gentiles. It makes no difference if the Toabah, disgusting religion, is of Egyptian origin, Babylonian, Assyrian, Egyptian, Greek, or Roman. The names of the sun, moon, and star gods change, but little else. Roman Catholicism, Rabbinic Judaism, and Islam were all based upon these same formulas. They deceive by counterfeiting the truth, by misrepresenting the things of Yahweh. Collectively and individually, they lead mankind away from God and to separation and death. Their every rite, ritual, and object of worship is an abomination, detestable, abhorrent, and repulsive. Before the show started, Kirk, this evening, you said that it's hard to imagine, considering what Yahweh, the only real God, is offering, that so many men and women have chosen a fake God. And I challenge that. I says, no, they haven't chosen a fake God. They have made their God. They didn't like the idea of having to listen to God. They didn't have the idea, the idea that God was intolerant of religion and politics. So they just made a God in their own image who liked them, a God who would listen to them, a God who would support their religion, a God that would agree with their politics, a God who would want to give them everything that they requested, a God that would promise them eternal life in paradise. That's what they want. So it's not that they chose a fake God. They simply made their own God so that their God would like them, because their God was like them.
Yeah. Mirror image.
Yeah.
Wow.
The ways of religion, politics, economic oppression, militarism, and conspiracy are not to be accepted. They should not be taught. They should not be tolerated. They should not be imitated or performed, ordained or instituted. This divine edict is so essential, it serves as the basis, the foundation for the second statement that Yahweh etched on the first of the two tablets. Don't be religious. So it all comes down to this. Who do you trust? Yourself? No one? Other men and women? Gods of your own making? Or Yahweh? What's your preference? The rantings of progressive wokeism and socialist secular humanism, communism or fascism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Mormonism, or Judaism, Roman Catholicism, Orthodox or Protestant Christianity, or worse, Islam? They're counterproductive. They offer nothing other than false hope, death. In fact, the best thing that you can get out of religion is to die. Seriously. Statement of fact. The best thing you can hope for in religion is to die. Because if you promote your religion, if you mislead people away from Yahweh because of your religion, then you're going to Sheol where you will never die.
Yeah, horrible.
So the best you can hope for if you're religious is to die. That doesn't sound like a real a cause to dedicate one's money or life to, does it?
Not at all.
It all comes down to this. If Yahweh is right, then they are wrong. Yahweh wanted Yehudim to remain untainted by the corruptions which surrounded them. They were Yahweh's control group, separated from the guiles of debilitating notions. In this way, they serve as witnesses, as examples to what life is like united with or separated from God. Fortunately for Jews, it hasn't been a pretty picture. But at least for some, that's about to change.
Hey.
Continuing to expand upon the worst of human behavior, however, Yahweh added, "There shall not be found among you one causing his son or daughter to pass over and perish in a fire." Someone predicting the future based upon pagan religious notions. A person who obscures the truth and believes in spiritualism. One who tempts and charms others. An individual who entices and seduces people to worship and pray. One who joins in and binds together by forming political or religious alliances. One who is obsessed with ghosts, makes requests of saints, or speaks on behalf of dead souls. A con man who beguiles in association with demonic spirits, or one who causes the premature death of others in association with a destructive plague. Devarim 18:11. For indeed, all who engage in and act upon these things are an abomination, considered abhorrent and detestable, toabah, to Yahweh. And so is the consequence of this repulsive religious excrement. Yahweh, your God, will drive them out, dispose them, and destroy them from your very presence. Devarim 18:12. So after Yahweh says, don't engage in the despicable ways of the Goyim, he lists specifics as to what the Goyim have done. They say, I don't want you doing this stuff. And while there were hints of politics in that list, it is otherwise entirely religious.
Yes.
Therefore, by way of this introduction and conclusion, we have yet another affirmation that Yahweh abhors what people have been led to believe. God is opposed to human sacrifice, to appeasing gods, misleading children, religious prophets, dishonesty, spiritualism, and anything which is in conflict with evidence and reason. He loathes those who encourage prayer and worship, as well as anyone who forms religious and political alliances. Judaism's reverence for deceased rabbis, Christianity's affinity for saints, and Islam's devotion to martyrs is an abomination to God. Yahweh abhors those who beguile his people, especially when they speak for the Lord. He is revolted by these things because they are murderous, depriving Jews, Christians, and Muslims of a knowledge of him, their freedom, and their lives. Misappropriating a fear of death and pretending to speak on behalf of the departed is the stick and carrot approach of religion. For most of human history, any opposition to religious authority led to a quick and torturous death. And to demonstrate that the clerics determined who lived and who died, the priest chose who they sacrificed to their gods. Then for the compliant, there was the promise of victory in war, of bountiful crops, and of life after death. And if you complied, you wouldn't be the next one sacrificed. The religious institutions responsible for English Bible translations and lexicons don't much like the idea that God is undermining their sanctified turf. So we find definitions such as divination, sorcerer, soothsayer, occultists, magicians, necromancers attributed to each of these terms in their dictionary. To believe them, it's as if God is preoccupied with Satan worship. Be assured, that's not the message. Folks, a meaningless percentage of people openly worship Satan as the adversary. However, the majority of people have been beguiled to worshiping the devil as if he were God. Therefore, the problem God is addressing does not pertain to the minuscule numbers of sorcerers, occultists, magicians, witches, or wizards, but instead with the imposition of institutionalized religion. For example, Yahweh's complaint begins by opposing the common and tragic practice of priests sacrificing children to appease their gods and to terrorize the masses into submission. The object of the sacrifice was always to false gods and not to the devil. From there, Yahweh condemns false prophets who lay the foundation for religious tyranny by fraudulently attributing their mythology to the culture's most revered ancestors. Continuing to expose the likes of Paul, Akiba, and Muhammad, he says that their beliefs are in conflict with evidence and reason and thus designed to entice the foolish through faith. God is chastising the saints and sages, the apostles and the messengers of the gods, and any and all who have obscured the truth. He is opposed to the Gnostic notions and the cult of death, which underlie Christianity, in addition to the murderous nature of Islam. Qassam, Anan, Nakash, Kasaf, and Chabar, which are the terms that were in this last statement, every one of them speak of misrepresenting the truth, of misconstruing and twisting God's message to impose an oppressive and binding religious scheme, especially those which control people by integrating religion and politics. Yahweh is condemning those who captivate and betray, who deliberately denigrate the masses in the name of their alter egos. He's no friend of those who promote conspiracies, consider themselves spiritual, who are irrational and easily seduced. God loathes those who are overtly religious and prefer the fellowship of the faithful. So in this list, God is impugning everyone who offers the hope of life after death to believers. And especially, Yahweh is opposed to Shaul Paul, the Gnostic, who inspired and wrote most of the Christian New Testament, based upon the pagan myth of a dying and resurrected God, advancing spiritualism over reality. And since he and his ilk were possessed by demons, the rhetoric is overtly fixated on agony and anguish. They are responsible for the deaths of countless billions, Their views are infectious and spreading like... Now, while this is condemning of Judaism and Christianity, it's also lethal to Islam. According to the Quran, Allah spends his days tormenting infidels with the entertainment of burning. The capricious promise of deliverance from hellfire is the Quran's most repetitive rant, with 1,000 iterations. But be advised, what pleases Allah is an abomination to Yahweh. The Islamic Hadith tells us that Muhammad's father was saved by use of divination arrows, which is another abomination. The same sources explain that Islam's prophet cast lots to determine the order his militants could pick Jewish slave girls to possess and rape. Anan lies at the heart of Muhammad's deadly deception. During one of his terrorist raids against a Jewish community, Kabar, Muhammad shouted, "I have been made victorious with terror, and war is deception." It is the mother's milk of politics. It's the essence of religion. Anan means to cloud the atmosphere sufficiently to block the light and diminish visibility. In politics, perceptions become reality as professional liars spin the fact, cloud the issue, and obscure their actual agenda. In the arena of egos, the most prideful weave an enchanting tale, while their operatives cover up the harsh and unflattering realities that lie beneath. I've long thought one of the most despicable people in America was Jan Palsky, the outgoing publicist for the president, press secretary. Mm. But she has just wrapped her arms around the most vile thing I have ever seen or heard. Yes, the president, always divisive of people, has decided he's going to hire the first black, openly homosexual press secretary. This woman is an utter nincompoop. But compared to his vice presidential choice, she's brilliant, but that's not much of a comparison. She is a one-trick pony. America to her is racist, depriving her and everyone of her race and sexual preference of opportunity. Mind you, she was educated in the Ivy League, her tuition paid by the public, and she has been given one of the top jobs in America. But nonetheless, you are to believe
she's oppressed,
that she's been prejudiced against. She has nothing to offer. Her every word is insane, and yet she wants to blame prejudice for her holding this office and being educated in an Ivy League school, being accepted over somebody who was vastly more qualified. We just live in an upside down
world. You can't make this stuff up, can you?
You just can't. You just can't make this stuff up. You know, we're out declaring war against Russia, fighting a proxy war by sending $50 billion worth of weapons to the Ukraine so they can go off and kill Russians, and we're painting Putin as the aggressor. How in the hell are we able to do it? And the overwhelming majority of Americans believe that Putin's the bad guy and we're the peacemakers. It was by taunting Russia and telling Russia that the Ukraine is going to be part of NATO, which is a military pact aimed at Russia, that this war was started.
Weapons.
And we're the pacifists. All he said is, I won't invade if you stop sending weapons to the Ukraine and don't make them part of NATO. What did we do? The Vice President came there and said, we're so excited that Ukraine wants to be part of NATO, and we send them $50 billion worth of advanced weapons to kill Russians. Okay, here we're the peacemakers. We can keep on telling ourselves that right to our grave. Oh, goodness. Religion, like its illegitimate brother politics, is all about swindlers obscuring the truth. A cloud forms over the people, which is so dense, visibility is diminished to near blindness. The abomination of Anon explains how faulty rhetoric, clearly or rationally. Nakash, which is, by the way, the same Hebrew word that is used for serpent and toxic, is central to many forms of satanic deception. Muhammad openly consulted with soothsayers. His Quran is filled with astrology, as Allah swears by the constellations, the sun and the moon. These concepts form the basis of the Quran's last two surahs, which are whispering oaths to Satan. Muhammad is shown throughout the Islamic hadith practicing magic and dealing with spells. But it was his chabar, eloquence, that made his message so lethal. I offer this twist on Muhammad's favorite occupation as a confession. The Prophet said, I have been given the keys of eloquent speech and given victory with terror. He spoke these words as he eluded Christians for the first time. Shabar is politicized religion. To shabar is to bind. Merriam-Webster tells us that the English word religion is based upon the Latin religare, to bind and to restrain. In the context of this list and as an adjunct to Kashaf and Shabar, it confirms that God is intolerant of religion and politics because they are used to confuse and control his people. Something the foremost advocate of liberty and reason finds wholly unacceptable. Well, that's a sobering thought. Yahweh is drawing a line in the sand. You can either side with him or with the oppressive and deadly nature of religion and politics. On one side of this divide, you will find a solitary door which leads to a personal relationship based upon love, light, truth, and life. On the other, mankind is found groping in the darkness of religion and wallowing in the deception of politics. Your choice. Many will chafe at the realization that God is intolerant. Societal conditioning makes it difficult for believers to accept that Yahweh is repulsed by the religious and political, the militant and the conspiratorial. And yet, even with the life he gave them, they are free to reject him and his offer. Today, I heard a quote from Nancy Pelosi. It's amazing how overly stupid America's leading politicians are. She was on the House floor. She's Speaker of the House, and she's feeble. I mean, I'm not going to condemn her because she's old. I'm not exactly young anymore, but she is way too old to hold public office. Anyway, she was giving this speech, and she says, the reason we need to arm and send these weapons to the Ukraine is because that terrible dictator in Russia is trying to starve the world. And Jesus said, because you fed me, you were mine. And so we need to oppose that dictator that is trying to starve the world. Yep, Jesus would have us send missiles to the Ukraine because the Ukraine was feeding him, I guess.
Sorry.
She says, by the way, you'll find that quotation in Matthew Little does she know that Matthew was written by an absolute fraud.
Oh, well, why spoil it for her?
Why spoil it for them? Yes. Yeah. The world is going to starve as a result of this administration's stupidity and the politicians in the Republican Party. So let's blame wildly, because we decided that we wanted to go to war against Russia and sanction Russia. We have caused severe food shortages around the world and driven up the price of living and food enormously, and it's our fault. And yet we think the solution is to send more missiles. You ask any one politician, what is the end game here? What are you trying to achieve? Well, we're going to replace Putin. Putin's the bad guy here. What are you going to get?
To what?
To what? You're going to...
Haven't we done that about how many countries?
To go into, you're telling us you're pro-democratic, you're going to go to a democratic country where the people overwhelmingly support Putin and voted for him. And you want to go to that country and you want regime change, just like you did in Ukraine when you replaced elected government with the one sponsored by the neo-Nazis. That was America's doing too. So you want regime change in Russia. The hell with what the Russians want, and you're going to not even think about who you're going to get to replace him.
Who's next?
Who's next? You know, we tried this game in Vietnam, and what did we get? Worse. We tried this game in Libya. What did we get? Worse.
Yeah.
We tried this game in Iraq. What did we get? Worse. We tried this game in Afghanistan. What did we get? Worse.
Pathetic.
We tried this game in China against Chiang Kai-shek. What did we get? Worse. We tried this game in Russia. What did we get? Worse. Every time America plays this game, we get worse. So if you continue to do the same thing and expect a different result, what are you?
An idiot.
It's an absolute uninformed nincompoop. And that is the nature of the United States of America, most of Europe, most of the world. We've just become collectively stupid. There is no end game here. We started a war, and this is no ordinary war. This is a war where the United States, who has the second most nuclear weapons in the world, is sending weapons and declaring they want regime change, and they want to eliminate the military using a proxy of the nation with the most nuclear weapons. So let's just say, for God's sake, that you are successful and you kill a gazillion Russians and you wipe out much of the Russian infantry and the Air Force. Let's say you do that. What are you going to get? Do you say that Putin and the Russians are going to say, well, boy, we're really sorry that we allowed you to kill us. We really want to beg your forgiveness for you having sent all those weapons to wipe us out. We really feel badly that you led a propaganda war against us. And so, yeah, we're so sorry. We're just going to go crawl in our little hole and starve to death based upon all of your sanctions. No, there's 0% chance of that. These nincompoops couldn't think it through and recognize that the only possible outcome of what they did is world war.
Mm-hmm.
Nuclear confrontation. It's the only possibility. Worldwide famine, revolution, starvation, the thrashing of people's savings, making their lives miserable, the death of truth, great irreversible constraints on the access to information. What else? Oh, and so what are we going to do? We're going to now have Finland become part of NATO.
Oh yeah, that came up today. Yeah.
Yeah, that's swell.
Let's make them totally.
And we call ourselves the
nuclear
peacemaker. We're the Democrats, and we want regime change, and we send $40, $50 billion worth of weapons to the Ukraine, which is supporting a government that anyone in their right mind knew was the least responsible, most graft-oriented in the world. They were the government that consistently welched on their loans from the IDF, World Bank, and even from the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we made them out to be saints. This is the country that has the highest percentage of armed neo-Nazis of any country in the world. And yet we present them as freedom fighters. No wonder we're sponsoring the two-state solution for Israel. Stupid is as stupid does. Well, Kirk, we've come to the end of our program. I assume that we'll be here next week. I recognize the world is devolving quickly. Man is denigrating himself at unprecedented rates. There is the death of truth, the death of honest effort, of personal responsibility, and of peaceful coexistence. We are in a period of a death spiral. It's exactly what Yahowah had predicted, and it's going to transpire exactly as he had forewarned. And all we can say is that if you want to know God, you need to get your act together and in a hurry. If you are a Jew, a Yehud, you need to understand what that name means, what Yahweh's name means, what's at stake, how much time you have left. If I were you, I would begin by reading an introduction to God, volume 1, 2, and 3, and then read the 6 volumes that are currently published of Yada Yahowah. Come to understand exactly what the covenant is comprised of. Come to understand exactly what transpired in Eden, because that's where we're headed. Come to understand the purpose of each of these 7 Moed Mikre. And then read observations so that you understand God's animosity to religion, followed by coming home so that you come to gain an appreciation for who the returning Messiah really is. Who is the Son of God? Who's the King of Kings? Who's the Shepherd? Because it isn't that other guy that you dismiss and besmirch, that fellow who's been misnamed Jesus Christ. No, he's not the Son of God. He's not the Messiah. He's not returning. He was the Passover lamb. His name was Yosha. No, the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of Kings, the one who is returning with Yahowah, the one who is the central individual in God's story, the one whose life and lyrics are the most important that will ever be. The one who is going to be spoken of in this very prophecy is Dod, who you have mislabeled David, and who you have afforded a star, which is a pagan symbol, something that he will abolish upon his return. I can assure you that if there is a flag for the state of Yisrael upon Yahweh's return, it will not be a star. A menorah, perhaps. Yahweh's name, perhaps. Yisrael, written, perhaps. Yahud, perhaps. Torah, perhaps. Bereth covenant, perhaps. Moed or Mikre, perhaps. But it sure as hell will not be a Star of David. Well, Kirk, you asked for
I'm glad I did.
Go into this.
This is great.
Yep, we made
third
it
reading
to
it is still great.
Yeah, to what, somewhere around page 17 in this chapter, 18 in this chapter. We've got a long way to go, but it is an interesting story, and I learned a lot from doing it. I think it's highly educational, explaining exactly what God is looking for, which is how he began, what he doesn't want us to do, which is where he is, and then this remarkable prophecy about who God is sending and why he's sending them and what he's going to be like. It's a great story.
Yes,
so may
indeed.
Yah bless. We look forward to being with you next week at this time. And Kirk, thank you very much for helping. Good night, one and all.
Yes, sir.
May Yah bless.
Shalom, shalom.